Imagine being a rural schoolteacher who invents something so revolutionary that it transforms not only an industry, but the outcome of an entire world war. In 1911, an American inventor from Ohio named Charles Kettering created a machine that all experts said was impossible. Engineers laughed at him. Manufacturers rejected him. But his invention became so essential that it forever changed how we live and how wars are fought. This is the story of how one determined man built the electric starter, revolutionized the automobile industry, and then created technologies that helped win World War II. Stay until the end, because the most incredible part comes in the final chapters. August 29, 1876, a small farm outside Loudonville, Ohio. This is where Charles Franklin Kettering entered the world, the fourth of 5 children born to Jacob and Martha Kettering. His father worked the land with calloused hands. His mother ran the household with strict discipline. Nothing about young Charlie suggested he would one day hold 186 patents and revolutionize both the automobile industry and military warfare. Life on the Kettering farm was simple, repetitive and demanding. Wake before dawn, feed the animals, work the fields, sleep, repeat. Charlie's older brothers, David and Adam, accepted this rhythm without question. They would grow up to be a farmer and a handyman. Ordinary lives for ordinary times. But Charlie was different. While his hands worked the plow, his mind wandered to mechanisms, to how things worked, to what could be improved. He showed early signs of mechanical curiosity. When farm equipment broke, young Charlie didn't just want it fixed. He wanted to understand why it failed. He took apart tools and studied their inner workings with an intensity that puzzled his parents. But curiosity alone doesn't build careers. Charlie needed education, and that's where his struggles truly began. After finishing high school, Kettering took a teaching position at a one-room schoolhouse. It paid the bills, but it wasn't his calling. He dreamed of engineering, of creating, of building things that mattered. So he enrolled at the College of Worcester, determined to pursue his passion. But fate had other plans. His eyes began to fail him. The strain of reading, of studying under dim lamplight, became unbearable. Headaches plagued him. His vision blurred. Doctors offered no solutions. Kettering was forced to withdraw from college and return to teaching, watching his engineering dreams slip away like sand through his fingers. For 2 years, he taught children their letters and numbers while his own education remained on hold. Many young men would have accepted defeat at this point. The world had spoken. Farming or teaching, those were his options. But Kettering possessed something that transcends talent, something that outweighs natural ability. He had determination that bordered on stubbornness. When his eyes improved slightly, he tried again. This time, he enrolled at the Ohio State University to study electrical engineering. And once again, his eyes betrayed him. The strain returned. The headaches came back. He withdrew once more, this time taking a job with the telephone line crew, installing wires across the Ohio countryside. Picture him there, a young man in his 20s, stringing telephone cables between poles, watching other men his age graduate from university, start careers, build futures. The rejection must have stung. The self-doubt must have whispered in his ear during those long days on the line crew. Maybe you're not meant for this. Maybe you should accept your limitations. But here's what separates the innovators from the dreamers. Kettering didn't listen to that voice. When his eyes improved again, he returned to Ohio State for a 3rd time. And this time, despite the continued eye problems, despite the headaches, despite the odds, he pushed through. He would study by lamplight until his eyes screamed for mercy, then rest them and return to his books. Failure after failure had taught him resilience. In 1904, at age 28, Charles Kettering finally graduated with his degree in electrical engineering. It had taken him longer than most. He had failed more times than most. But he had something his classmates didn't. He had learned how to fail and keep moving forward. And that lesson would prove more valuable than any grade or diploma. The rejected farm boy who couldn't see was about to change the world. Fresh out of Ohio State with his hard-won electrical engineering degree, Kettering needed a job. Not just any job, but one that would let him create, invent, and solve problems. He found that opportunity at the National Cash Register Company in Dayton, Ohio, one of the most innovative companies of the era. NCR didn't just hire him. They gave him the title electrical inventor and told him to revolutionize their product line. Think about that for a moment. A company gave a 28-year-old recent graduate the explicit job title of inventor. They didn't want him to maintain existing products or make minor improvements. They wanted disruption. They wanted innovation, and Kettering was about to deliver beyond their wildest expectations. At the time, NCR's cash registers were purely mechanical devices. Every sale required a clerk to turn a heavy hand crank, a physical process that was slow, tiring, and limited in functionality. Kettering saw this as an engineering problem begging for an electrical solution. But he didn't just want to electrify the existing design. He wanted to reimagine what a cash register could do. His first major innovation addressed a problem retailers faced daily: credit approval. In 1906, there was no electronic payment system. If a customer wanted to buy something on credit, a store clerk would have to physically walk to a central office, ask for approval, wait for a manager to check records, then walk back to inform the customer. This process could take 15 minutes or more. Customers got frustrated. Sales were lost. Money was left on the table. Kettering created a system that coupled existing telephones at sales counters to solenoid-operated stamping machines. A clerk could now request credit approval electronically, and a central office could approve it with the push of a button. The stamp would print the approval right at the sales counter. What once took 15 minutes now took 15 seconds. It was a precursor to modern credit card systems, invented decades before anyone had conceived of plastic payment cards. But Kettering wasn't done. His next project tackled restaurant billing, which presented unique challenges. Restaurants needed to track multiple categories, like food, beverages, and tobacco products. They needed to add items throughout a meal, subtract items that were returned, and produce duplicate receipts. The mechanical cash registers of the day couldn't handle such complexity. Working with his team, Kettering designed an electrical cash register system that could do all of this and more. It combined a printer for duplicate receipts, the ability to divide totals into subcategories, and even subtraction capability for returns and corrections. NCR introduced this system commercially in 1908, and it became an instant success in the restaurant industry. During his 5 years at NCR, from 1904 to 1909, Kettering secured 23 patents for the company. Each one solved a real problem. Each one made business operations faster, easier, or more reliable. He later explained his success simply: "I didn't hang around much with other inventors and the executive fellows. I lived with the sales gang. They had some real notion of what people wanted." This philosophy would define Kettering's entire career. He didn't invent for the sake of inventing. He didn't create clever solutions to problems that didn't exist. He listened to the people who used the products, understood their pain points, and built solutions that made their lives better. It was practical innovation driven by real-world needs, but even as his success at NCR grew, Kettering's attention was turning toward a newer, more exciting technology that was just beginning to transform American life. On the streets of Dayton, automobiles were becoming more common, and they had problems. Serious, life-threatening problems. Kettering was about to solve one of the deadliest. In the early 1900s, owning an automobile meant living with a dark reality. Starting your car could kill you. Every single automobile of the era required hand cranking to start the engine. You would insert a heavy metal crank into the front of the vehicle, position yourself carefully, and then rotate it with considerable force. When the engine caught, that crank would often kick back violently. Broken arms were common. Broken jaws were frequent. Deaths happened regularly. The situation was more than inconvenient. It was a genuine barrier to automobile adoption. Many people, particularly women, refused to drive because of the dangerous starting procedure. The automobile industry had a serious problem, and nobody seemed to have a solution. Electric starters had been tried before, but they required massive batteries and still weren't reliable enough for daily use. Most engineers had simply accepted that hand cranking was a necessary evil, but in 1907, Kettering and his colleague Edward Deeds from NCR started spending their evenings and weekends in Deeds' barn, working on automobile improvements. They began with the ignition system. American cars of the time used non-rechargeable dry cell batteries that had to be replaced every few hundred miles. Kettering adapted technology from his cash register work, creating a magnetic relay that produced a single spark instead of a shower, dramatically reducing battery drain and extending battery life. This innovation led to the founding of the Dayton Engineering Laboratories Company, or Delco, in 1909. Cadillac immediately ordered 8,000 units of their improved ignition system. Kettering left his comfortable position at NCR to devote himself full-time to Delco and automotive innovation. He was now 33 years old, married with a young son, leaving job security to bet on his own inventions. It was a risk, but Kettering had learned long ago that playing it safe meant accepting limitations. The ignition system was just the beginning. Kettering's real target was the deadly hand crank, and he approached it with the same systematic thinking that had served him at NCR. From the very start, he didn't envision just an electric starter. He conceived of a complete integrated electrical system for starting, ignition, and lighting. One system, one solution, multiple problems solved. The engineering challenges were enormous. The motor needed to provide substantial torque for a brief starting period, then operate at a different ratio when the car was running. He had to develop a system that could switch between these modes automatically, and it all had to be powered by a rechargeable battery that the system itself would recharge while driving. Kettering borrowed a concept from his cash register work, a motor capable of producing a significant burst of power for brief periods. He switched from dry cells to storage batteries. He designed the motor to serve double duty, acting as a generator to recharge the battery when the engine was running. He worked out gear ratios that would provide high torque during starting, but operate efficiently during normal running. By 1911, he had a working prototype. In 1912, Cadillac became the first automobile manufacturer to offer the electric starter as standard equipment. The impact was immediate and revolutionary. Women could now start cars safely. Elderly drivers were no longer at risk. The automobile industry experienced a surge in sales because the single biggest barrier to adoption had been eliminated. Kettering's electric starter saved countless lives and injuries. It opened automobile ownership to millions who had been excluded by physical limitations or safety concerns. It was one of the most important automotive innovations in history. And yet, it was just the beginning of what Charles Kettering would contribute to. Transportation and warfare. The man who couldn't get through college was now changing the world. April 1917. The United States had just entered World War I, and the military was desperate for technological advantages. Aviation was barely a decade old. The Wright brothers' first flight had occurred just 14 years earlier, and now airplanes were dogfighting over European battlefields. But aircraft were expensive, pilots were scarce, and training took months. The U.S. Army Aircraft Board needed something different, something revolutionary. They turned to Charles Kettering with an audacious request: design an unmanned flying bomb that could hit targets 40 miles away. An aircraft with no pilot, a weapon that could be built cheaply, launched toward enemy positions, and deliver a devastating payload without risking American lives. In 1917, this concept existed only in imagination. But the army believed that if anyone could turn imagination into reality, it was the man who had revolutionized automobiles. Kettering accepted the challenge immediately. He assembled his team, which included none other than Orville Wright himself as the aeronautical consultant. Think about that collaboration. The man who invented the airplane and the man who invented the electric starter working together to create something the world had never seen. The guidance system would be designed by Elmer Ambrose Sperry, another brilliant engineer. This wasn't just a good team. This was an all-star lineup of American innovation. What they created became known as the Kettering Aerial Torpedo, though everyone called it the Bug. And it was unlike anything in existence. The Bug was a small biplane with a wingspan of nearly 15 feet and a length of just 12 feet. But here's what made it remarkable. To keep costs down and production fast, Kettering built the wings from cardboard and the fuselage from papier-mâché reinforced with wood laminates. At just $400 per unit, it could be mass-produced at a fraction of the cost of a manned aircraft. But cheap construction didn't mean simple technology. The Bug was packed with innovations that wouldn't become common for decades. It launched from a four-wheeled dolly that rolled down a portable track, much like modern aircraft carrier catapults. Once airborne, the dolly would detach and fall away. A 40-horsepower De Palma engine would propel the Bug at 50 miles per hour toward its target. Carrying 300 pounds of explosives equal to the aircraft's own weight, the guidance system was the true marvel. A small gyroscope kept the Bug's heading true, maintaining its course automatically. An aneroid barometer, so sensitive it could detect the change in air pressure between a desktop and the floor, controlled elevation. This kept the Bug at a preset cruising altitude, without any human intervention. It was autopilot decades before commercial autopilots would exist. The targeting system used elegant mechanical simplicity. Before launch, operators would calculate three factors: wind direction, wind speed, and actual distance to the target. Using these numbers, they would determine how many engine revolutions were needed to reach the destination. A cam would be set to count these revolutions. When the engine reached that precise count, the cam would drop, shutting off the engine and releasing the Bug's wings. The torpedo-shaped fuselage, loaded with 300 pounds of explosives, would then plunge into the target. It was a cruise missile. In 1917, guided by mechanical computers and preset calculations, Kettering had created a weapon that combined aviation, automation, and explosive delivery in a way that anticipated modern warfare by decades. The Bug represented a fundamental shift in military thinking, the ability to project lethal force without risking pilots' lives. The Dayton Wright Airplane Company, which Kettering had co-founded with Deeds and other investors, including Orville Wright, began production. About 45 Bugs were built. Test flights were scheduled. The military was eager to see if this revolutionary weapon would work as promised. But reality, as it often does, had other plans. October 2nd, 1918, Dayton, Ohio, military brass, government officials, and Kettering's team gathered to witness the first test flight of the Bug. The tension was palpable. Years of work, significant military funding, and the hope of a revolutionary weapon all converged on this single moment. The Bug sat on its launch dolly, its cardboard wings catching the morning light, its explosive payload replaced with ballast for safety. Everything was ready. The engine roared to life. The dolly began rolling down the track, picking up speed. The Bug lifted off successfully, and then, in front of everyone, disaster struck. Instead of maintaining horizontal flight, the Bug's nose pitched upward dramatically. It climbed too steeply, the angle becoming more extreme with each passing second. Then inevitably it stalled. The Bug hung in the air for a heartbeat, before falling back to earth and crashing into the ground in a twisted mess of cardboard and wood. General Hap Arnold, one of the military observers, later described the scene. After the crash, He and other generals found themselves running for cover as subsequent test flights became equally unpredictable. The bug's guidance system, so carefully designed, seemed to have a mind of its own. One test saw the bug veer off course and chase the distinguished observers across the field. It was equal parts terrifying and absurd. Imagine senior military officials scattering like schoolchildren while an unmanned aircraft, bearing their hoped-for superweapon, careens wildly overhead. But Kettering didn't quit. He never quit. He and his team analyzed the failure, adjusted the controls, refined the guidance system, and tried again. Subsequent flights showed improvement. Some were actually successful, achieving their programmed flight paths and hitting their targets. The bug demonstrated to Army personnel at Dayton that the concept could work. Out of 6 attempts in Dayton, 2 were successful. Tests at Amityville yielded 1 success out of 4 attempts. At Carlstrom Field in Florida, 4 out of 14 flights hit their marks. One test at Carlstrom became legendary. The bug launched successfully, climbed to altitude, and then simply vanished from sight. As the team watched it disappear into the clouds, Kettering reportedly said, "Leave the thing up there." But his crew insisted on finding it, and they did, 21 miles from the launch point. The bug had flown farther than designed, proving the concept could exceed expectations when everything worked correctly. Yet despite these successes, despite proving the technology could function, the military remained deeply skeptical. Their concerns were legitimate. The bug's success rate hovered around 30%. For every successful flight, there were 2 failures. And unlike traditional artillery or manned aircraft, the bug couldn't adjust course after launch. If the wind calculations were slightly off, if weather conditions changed, if any of the mechanical systems failed, the bug would miss its target. Or worse, it might crash among friendly troops. Military officials worried specifically about reliability when carrying explosives over Allied positions. The thought of an unmanned aircraft loaded with 300 pounds of explosives veering off course and crashing into American or Allied troops was a nightmare scenario. They couldn't trust it. They wouldn't deploy it. By the time the war ended in November 1918, about 45 bugs had been produced, but not a single one had been used in combat. Kettering's revolutionary weapon, the world's first cruise missile, never fired a shot in anger. The military's official stance was that the technology was promising but premature. They thanked Kettering for his service, filed the bug project away, and moved on. But they didn't destroy the bugs. They didn't dismantle the technology. Instead, they did something stranger. They classified everything about the project and kept it secret. The Kettering bug became one of World War I's hidden stories, a weapon that worked but was never used, an innovation ahead of its time. And then, for 20 years, it disappeared. Through the 1920s and 1930s, the Kettering bug became a ghost. Most Americans had no idea it had ever existed. The military kept all details classified. No newspaper articles appeared. No magazine stories celebrated Kettering's achievement. In an era before modern security clearances and official secrecy, this represents a remarkable feat of information control. The bug had been buried, intentionally hidden from public knowledge and historical record. But here's what the official story doesn't mention. The Army didn't entirely abandon the bug. Throughout the 1920s, what had become the U.S. Army Air Service continued to experiment with the unmanned aircraft. Behind closed doors, at remote testing facilities, engineers and military planners kept working on the technology. They refined the guidance systems. They tested new materials. They explored different engine configurations. The research was sporadic, underfunded, and often interrupted, but it never completely stopped. Then the funding dried up entirely. The Great Depression hit, and military budgets were slashed. Research into experimental weapon systems became a luxury the Army couldn't afford. The bug project was officially terminated. The remaining aircraft were stored away. The documentation was filed in military archives. The knowledge remained locked away, waiting. Meanwhile, Charles Kettering moved on to his next chapters. He had sold Delco to General Motors in 1916, and in 1920 he became Vice President and Director of Research for GM, a position he would hold for 27 years. His work there was extraordinary. He directed development of variable speed transmissions, four-wheel brakes, safety glass, quick-drying automotive paints, and countless other improvements that shaped the modern automobile. He also developed, with chemist Thomas Migley Jr., tetraethyl lead as a gasoline additive to prevent engine knock. And he helped create Freon, a refrigerant that revolutionized cooling systems. These inventions made him wealthy and famous. By the 1930s, Kettering was a household name in America, celebrated as one of the nation's greatest living inventors. Time magazine featured him on its cover in 1933, but his work on the bug remained secret. When people asked Kettering about his contributions to World War I, he could mention his work on aircraft ignition systems and synthetic aircraft fuel. But the bug, that stayed classified. That stayed hidden. That became the achievement he couldn't discuss, the innovation he couldn't claim, the weapon that had been too far ahead of its time. Then came the late 1930s, and the world situation changed dramatically. Nazi Germany was rearming. Japan was expanding aggressively in Asia. The storm clouds of another global conflict were gathering, and this time, military planners knew it would be even more devastating than the Great War. Technology had advanced. Aircraft were faster. Bombs were bigger. The next war would be fought with weapons that didn't exist in 1918, except for one weapon, one concept, one technology that had existed all along, waiting in military archives for someone to remember its potential. Somewhere in Washington, in the late 1930s, military planners began pulling out old files from World War I. They reviewed experimental weapons programs. They analyzed what had worked and what had failed. And they found the Kettering bug. By 1940, with war raging in Europe and America's entry looking increasingly inevitable, President Franklin Roosevelt established the National Inventors Council. Its purpose was to harness American innovation for the coming conflict. And who did Roosevelt appoint to lead this council? Charles Kettering, the man who had invented the bug 2 decades earlier. The man whose flying torpedo had been rejected, classified, and forgotten. The secret weapon was about to be revealed. And this time, the world was ready for it. While Charles Kettering led the National Inventors Council from 1940 onward, mobilizing American innovation for the war effort, something remarkable was happening in the background. Military engineers and weapons designers were revisiting old projects, looking for concepts that could be revived and improved with modern technology. The Kettering bug kept appearing in those conversations. The technology had aged well. The fundamental concept of an unmanned aerial vehicle carrying an explosive payload to a preset target remained sound. What had been lacking in 1918, reliability and accuracy, could potentially be solved with the electronic advances of the 1940s. Better gyroscopes, more accurate barometric altimeters, improved engine reliability, radio guidance systems. All of these technologies had matured significantly in the intervening 2 decades. Military planners studying the bug recognized something that Kettering had understood all along. This weapon anticipated the future of warfare. The ability to strike targets without risking pilots' lives represented a fundamental strategic advantage. The low cost of production meant these weapons could be deployed in large numbers, overwhelming enemy defenses through sheer volume rather than precision. One bug might miss its target, but a swarm of bugs launched simultaneously could devastate an enemy position. The British had been thinking along similar lines. Facing German bombing campaigns and desperate for ways to strike back, British engineers developed their own unmanned weapons. The documents show that British radio-controlled weapons from 1917 had been kept secret during the interwar period. Just like the bug, now, with war escalating, both American and British programs were being declassified and shared between allies. This cross-pollination of ideas led directly to the development of several World War II weapons systems. The German V-1 flying bomb, which terrorized London in 1944, operated on principles remarkably similar to the Kettering bug. Launch from a ramp, fly on a preset course, count engine revolutions or distance, cut the engine and dive into the target. The Germans had arrived at nearly identical solutions, possibly through their own research, or possibly through intelligence gathering about Allied experiments. American weapons designers, now fully aware of both the bug's history and German developments, created improved versions. The Interstate TDR-1, an assault drone used by the U.S. Navy in the Pacific Theater, combined the bug's concept with radio-controlled technology. It could carry 2,000 pounds of explosives and be guided to its target by a controller in a mothership aircraft. It was the bug's descendant, improved with technologies that hadn't existed in Kettering's era. But the bug's most significant legacy wasn't any single weapon system. It was the concept itself. Kettering had proven back in 1917 that unmanned aircraft could work. The technology might have been premature, the execution might have been flawed, but the idea was sound. Every cruise missile, every military drone, every unmanned combat aerial vehicle that would follow, from World War II through the modern era, could trace its lineage back to that cardboard-winged biplane that crashed on its first test flight in Dayton. The military's decision to classify the bug rather than abandon it proved prescient. By keeping the research secret but preserved, they ensured that when technology caught up to Kettering's vision, the groundwork was already laid. The experiments had been run. The mistakes had been documented. The lessons had been learned. Future weapons designers didn't have to start from scratch. They could build on Kettering's foundation. In 1945, when World War II finally ended, the Kettering bug's existence was finally declassified and revealed to the public. Newspaper articles celebrated Kettering's ahead-of-its-time invention. Military historians recognized the bug as a pioneering weapon system, and Charles Kettering, now 69 years old and still directing research at General Motors, could finally discuss the project that had remained secret for nearly 3 decades. The weapon that was too advanced for World War I had helped shape World War II. Being ahead of your time isn't always a blessing. Charles Kettering learned this lesson repeatedly throughout his career, but nowhere more dramatically than with the bug. When you create something the world isn't ready for, you face a unique form of frustration. You can see the potential, you understand the applications. But convincing others requires not just proving your invention works, but proving the world needs it now. The bug failed in World War I, not because the technology was fundamentally flawed. It failed because the surrounding ecosystem, the supporting technologies, the operational doctrines, the military mindset, none of it was ready for unmanned warfare. The military had barely figured out how to use manned aircraft effectively. Asking them to trust unmanned weapons was like asking someone who just learned to ride a bicycle to fly a helicopter. This pattern of premature innovation defined much of Kettering's career. Consider his diesel engine work at General Motors in the 1930s. He developed lightweight, high-speed two-stroke diesel engines that would eventually revolutionize the locomotive and heavy equipment industries. But when he first proposed them, the railroad industry was skeptical. Diesel wasn't proven. Steam locomotives worked fine. Why take the risk? Kettering persisted because he understood something crucial. Being right too early is still being right. Eventually the world catches up. Eventually the supporting technologies mature. Eventually the economic or strategic situation changes, and suddenly what seemed impossible becomes essential. His diesel engines eventually powered countless locomotives, ships, and generators. The technology was sound. The timing just had to align. The same held true for his work on anti-knock gasoline. When Kettering and Thomas Migley first proposed adding tetraethyl lead to gasoline to eliminate engine knock, critics questioned the safety, the cost, the necessity. But engine knock was limiting engine performance. Higher compression ratios which meant more power and efficiency, couldn't be achieved without solving the knock problem. Kettering's solution, though later recognized as environmentally problematic, solved an immediate engineering challenge and enabled the high-performance engines that powered mid-20th century automobiles. In every case, Kettering's approach was the same: identify a real problem, develop a practical solution, then persist until the world recognized its value. He famously said, "It doesn't matter if you try and try again and fail. It does matter if you try and fail to try again." This philosophy sustained him through repeated rejections, failed demonstrations, and skeptical audiences. But here's the deeper truth about the bug story: rejection doesn't mean failure. The bug was rejected by the World War I military, but the technology lived on. The research continued. The lessons learned informed future innovations. And when circumstances changed, when another war demanded new solutions, that rejected weapon became the foundation for an entire class of military systems. This is the real lesson of Charles Kettering's story. Innovation isn't just about having good ideas. It's about persistence in the face of rejection. It's about believing in your vision when others can't see it. It's about understanding that being ahead of your time means you'll have to wait for your time to arrive. Kettering built his career on this understanding. From the farm boy who failed out of college twice, to the cash register inventor who revolutionized retail, to the automotive pioneer who made cars accessible to everyone, to the weapons designer who created a technology before the military knew what to do with it. Every step demonstrated the power of persistent innovation. The bug wasn't his greatest invention. The electric starter probably saved more lives. His automotive innovations touched more people. But the bug represents the purest expression of his innovative philosophy. Create what the world needs, even if the world doesn't know it yet. Then wait, because eventually, inevitably, the world catches up to good ideas. And when it does, the pioneers who persisted are remembered as visionaries. While the Kettering bug's military legacy was being written in World War II weapon systems, Charles Kettering himself was focused on challenges far removed from warfare. By the 1940s, he had become one of America's most celebrated inventors, but his interests had expanded well beyond automobiles and aviation. He was thinking about energy, about health, about the fundamental problems facing humanity. One obsession dominated his later years: photosynthesis. Kettering became convinced that truly understanding how plants convert sunlight into energy would solve humanity's long-term energy crisis. He knew that fossil fuels, despite their abundance, would eventually run out. He wanted to unlock nature's solar power system, the process that had sustained life on Earth for billions of years. To pursue this research, he founded the Kettering Foundation at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. It was pure research, unlikely to produce immediate practical applications, but Kettering believed in investing in the future. His interest in medical applications of technology led to several remarkable innovations. He designed and built the Kettering Hypertherm, a device that treated neurosyphilis by carefully heating the body to therapeutic temperatures. He developed an incubator for premature infants that dramatically improved their survival rates. His research into magnetism's applications in medicine laid groundwork for what would eventually become MRI technology. These weren't side projects or hobbies. They represented Kettering's fundamental belief that engineering could solve problems in any field. In 1944, tragedy struck. Kettering's sister died of cancer. The loss hit him deeply. He began researching cancer treatment with the same systematic approach he brought to automotive engineering. The following year, he and General Motors President Alfred Sloan founded what became the Sloan-Kettering Institute for Cancer Research at the Memorial Cancer Center in New York City. Their premise was revolutionary for its time: apply industrial research techniques to medical problems. used the same systematic experimentation, the same rigorous testing, the same iterative improvement that had revolutionized manufacturing. Then in 1946, Kettering's wife Olive died of pancreatic cancer. 2 cancer deaths in 2 years. The man who had solved so many engineering problems couldn't solve this one, but he could fund others to try. The Sloan Kettering Institute became his tribute to both his sister and his wife, a testament to the belief that no problem was unsolvable if enough intelligent people worked on it systematically enough. Kettering retired from General Motors in 1947 at age 71, but retirement for him meant more time for research, not less. He continued consulting for GM. He remained active in the Kettering Foundation's work on photosynthesis. He gave speeches about innovation, sharing his philosophy with audiences around the world. His talks were famous for their accessible language and practical wisdom. He didn't speak in technical jargon. He told stories. He shared failures as readily as successes. He made innovation seem achievable. One of his most famous quotes captures his entire approach to life. "My interest is in the future because I'm going to spend the rest of my life there." He wasn't interested in past glories. He didn't dwell on his 186 patents or his revolutionary inventions. He wanted to know what problems remained unsolved, what challenges still faced humanity, what innovations would shape tomorrow. His life contradicted his own advice about history. He said studying history was a waste of time, that you never get anywhere looking in your rearview mirror. Yet his own story became an inspiration precisely because it demonstrates timeless principles. Persistence matters. Practical solutions beat elegant theories. Listening to users beats talking to experts. Failure is education, not defeat. Innovation serves humanity, not ego. These lessons, learned over decades of invention and refinement, became Kettering's final gift to future innovators. Charles Franklin. Kettering died on November 25, 1958, at his home in Dayton, Ohio, after suffering a series of strokes. He was 82 years old. At the time of his death, he held 186 patents. He had founded or co-founded multiple companies that collectively employed thousands of people. His inventions had touched virtually every American's life, whether they knew his name or not. Think about your daily life for a moment. If you've ever started a car with a key or button instead of a dangerous hand crank, you have Kettering to thank. If you've ever benefited from diesel-powered transportation, from trains to ships to generators, his research made that possible. If you've used a modern cash register or credit card system, you're using technology descended from his retail innovations. If you've been treated at a hospital that uses advanced medical equipment, some of that technology traces back to his medical research funding. But perhaps his most important legacy isn't any single invention. It's the model he provided for how innovation actually works. Kettering demolished the myth of the lone genius having sudden breakthroughs. His career demonstrated that real innovation is systematic, iterative, and rooted in understanding real-world problems. He failed repeatedly, adjusted his approach, and tried again. He listened to users rather than experts. He focused on practical solutions rather than elegant theories. The Kettering bug embodies this approach perfectly. It was rejected. It failed most of its tests. It never fired a shot in the war it was designed for. Yet it succeeded in the most important way. It proved a concept that would shape the future of warfare. Every military drone flying today, from reconnaissance UAVs to armed predators to long-range cruise missiles, descends from that cardboard-winged biplane that Kettering built in 1917. Military historians now recognize the bug as the first practical cruise missile, the pioneer of unmanned aerial warfare. Museums display surviving bug components as treasured artifacts. The Smithsonian Institution preserves documentation of the project. Military academies teach about it when discussing the evolution of aerial warfare. What was once classified and forgotten is now celebrated as visionary. This transformation, from rejected failure to recognized triumph, took decades. Kettering lived long enough to see the bug's declassification and recognition, but he never sought credit or complained about the decades of secrecy. He had moved on to other problems, other innovations, other ways to improve human life. The bug was just one project among hundreds, one attempt to solve a problem that needed solving. His approach to failure particularly resonates today. In our modern culture of instant success and viral breakthroughs, Kettering's story provides necessary perspective. He failed out of college twice. His first major military project was rejected. Many of his inventions required years of refinement before achieving commercial success. He faced skepticism, rejection, and outright failure repeatedly throughout his career. And yet he persisted, not through blind stubbornness, but through systematic analysis and adjustment. Modern Silicon Valley entrepreneurs often quote Kettering without knowing it. His philosophy of rapid prototyping, learning from failure, and iterating towards success has become the foundation of modern startup culture. His insistence on understanding user needs before designing solutions predates modern design thinking by decades. His belief that interdisciplinary teams produce better results than isolated specialists has become conventional wisdom in innovation circles. The institutions he founded continue his work. The Sloan Kettering Memorial Cancer Center remains one of the world's premier cancer research facilities. The Kettering Foundation continues to fund research into democracy, education, and civic engagement. General Motors' research divisions, though transformed over decades, still reflect the systematic approach to innovation that Kettering established. His legacy isn't just his patents. It's the infrastructure he built for continued innovation. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came from the automotive industry itself. When General Motors established its Kettering University in Flint, Michigan, they created an institution dedicated to practical, hands-on engineering education. Students there don't just study theory. They work in laboratories, build prototypes, solve real problems for real companies. They learn by doing, by failing, by adjusting, and by trying again. It's exactly how Kettering learned, exactly how he taught, exactly how he believed engineering should be practiced. Today, when we discuss innovation, we often focus on the successful outcome, the finished product, the revolutionary breakthrough. We forget the years of failure that preceded it. We ignore the rejected prototypes and failed demonstrations. We skip over the skepticism and doubt. Charles Kettering's story reminds us that these elements aren't obstacles to innovation. They are innovation. The path from idea to impact runs through repeated failure, persistent refinement, and eventual recognition. The farm boy who couldn't see well enough to finish college became one of America's most prolific inventors. The cash register designer became an automotive pioneer. The man whose flying torpedo was rejected built the foundation for modern unmanned warfare. At every stage, rejection and failure preceded success. At every stage, persistence and systematic problem-solving transformed setbacks into breakthroughs. This is the real story of the Kettering bug, not the technical specifications or the test flights or the military applications. The real story is what it teaches us about innovation itself. Good ideas ahead of their time don't die. They wait, they evolve, they influence. And when the world finally catches up, when circumstances finally align, when supporting technologies finally mature, those ideas emerge from obscurity and change everything. Charles Kettering understood this deeply. He built his career on it. He lived it every day. And in the end, his greatest invention wasn't any particular device or system. It was a method for turning problems into solutions, failures into learning, and rejections into opportunities. That method, that approach, that persistence in the face of doubt, that is his true legacy. The Kettering bug flew for less than a minute on its first test before crashing. But the idea behind it has been flying for over a century, and it shows no signs of landing. From the cardboard wings of 1918 to the sophisticated drones of today, the lineage is clear. The rejected inventor who wouldn't quit built something more permanent than any machine. He built the future. And the future, eventually, always arrives. Imagine a young farm boy from rural America who never dreamed of being a hero. At 24, he became the greatest American flying ace of all time, single-handedly shooting down 40 Japanese planes in the skies over the Pacific. His story is so extraordinary it reads like fiction, yet every detail is true. This is Major Richard E. Bong, the crazy farm boy who changed the course of World War II. Stay until the end to discover the tragic fate that awaited him after surviving the bloodiest war in history. Richard Ira Bong was born on September 24, 1920, on a small farm in Poplar, Wisconsin. He was the eldest of 9 children in a family of Swedish immigrants who worked hard farming the land. Life on the farm was simple, but steeped in values such as discipline, hard work, and humility. From a young age, Dick, as his family called him, demonstrated an insatiable curiosity for machines. He spent hours disassembling and reassembling tractors, engines, and any other equipment he could find on the farm. His father, Carl Bong, used to say that the boy had grease in his veins instead of blood. Little Poplar had fewer than 500 inhabitants. Children attended one-room rural schools, where all grades learned together. Dick was an average student, not particularly brilliant academically, but extremely skilled with his hands. His teachers noted that he struggled with theory, but when it came to practical application, no one could surpass him. In 1938, at age 18, Dick enrolled at Superior State Teachers College, now known as the University of Wisconsin-Superior. He planned to become a physical education teacher, following a safe and predictable path for a young man from the countryside. But fate had other plans. It was during college that Dick first encountered aviation. The U.S. government had created the Civilian Pilot Training Program, an initiative to train pilots in case war loomed. Dick signed up out of pure curiosity, little imagining that the decision would change his life forever. During his first flying lessons, something extraordinary happened. The young farmer, who could barely pass algebra, demonstrated an impressive natural talent for piloting. His instructors were astonished by his ability to feel the aircraft, to understand its limits and possibilities as if it were an extension of his own body. Dick graduated from the civilian program in 1941, months before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. He was about to begin his teaching career when the world plunged into chaos. On December 7, 1941, news of the attack reached Little Poplar like a bolt of lightning. Japan had bombed the U.S. naval base in Hawaii, killing more than 2,400 Americans and destroying much of the Pacific Fleet. 4 days later, Dick made the decision that would define his legacy. He enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces, leaving behind his plans to teach children in a rural school. His mother, Dora Bong, wept as he left, clutching her eldest son with a broken heart. She knew that war consumed young men like him, but there was something different about Dick Bong, a rare combination of natural ability, superhuman reflexes, and an unshakable calm under pressure. Traits that would soon make him the most lethal fighter pilot America has ever produced. The farm boy was about to become a legend. Richard Bong's Air Force training was marked by an incident that nearly ended his career before it began. During an advanced training flight in 1942, he decided to make a low pass over his girlfriend's house in San Francisco. Extremely low. Witnesses reported that Bong's P-38 Lightning flew so close to rooftops that people could see his face through the cockpit. He literally flew between buildings, an insane maneuver that violated every conceivable safety rule. But it didn't stop there. The following week, he flew under the Golden Gate Bridge, a feat that defied both death and military regulations. His superiors were furious. Commander George Kenney, who would later become his staunchest defender, wrote in his official report that the young pilot was either completely insane or possessed extraordinary abilities. Perhaps both. Instead of expelling him, Kenney imposed a creative punishment. Bong was ordered to teach aerobatics lessons to junior cadets. The punishment proved to be a blessing in disguise. By repeatedly teaching extreme maneuvers, Bong perfected techniques that would later save his life in combat. He learned every limit of the P-38 Lightning, the twin-engine aircraft that would become his lethal weapon in the skies over the Pacific. The P-38 was an extraordinary machine. With two 1,475 horsepower Allison engines, it could reach speeds exceeding 660 kilometers per hour. Its unique configuration, with engines at the wingtips and the cockpit in the center, gave the pilot exceptional visibility. It was armed with four 50-caliber machine guns and a 20-millimeter cannon, all concentrated in the nose of the aircraft. Bong fell in love with the P-38. Unlike other pilots who complained about its complexity, he devoted hours to studying every system, every quirk of the machine. He developed an almost symbiotic relationship with the aircraft, understanding its sounds, vibrations, and temperament. In September 1942, Bong was deployed to the Southwest Pacific Theater of Operations. Attached to the 9th Fighter Squadron, 49th Fighter Group, he arrived at Port Moresby, New Guinea, a forward base operating in primitive conditions. The heat was stifling, tropical diseases were decimating the troops, and Japanese attacks were constant. His first combat mission took place on December 27, 1942. Bong was on a patrol over Buna when he spotted formations of Japanese bombers escorted by Zero fighters. His heart raced, but his hands remained steady on the controls. What happened next surprised even the most experienced pilots. Bong dove through the enemy escort, positioned himself perfectly behind a Zero, and opened fire at near-suicidal range. The Japanese fighter exploded in a ball of flames. His first victory. In the same engagement, he shot down another Zero using a maneuver that defied the tactical manuals. Instead of pursuing the enemy in a tight turn, where the agile Zero had the advantage, Bong used the P-38's superior speed to position himself and fire in short, accurate bursts. That day, the Wisconsin farmer proved he belonged in the sky. But that was just the beginning of a career that would rewrite the history books of military aviation. Richard Bong wasn't the most spectacular pilot in the squadron. He didn't perform dazzling aerobatics or risk impossible maneuvers in combat. His genius lay in the brutal simplicity of his approach. While other pilots tried to outmaneuver the Japanese Zeros in traditional dogfights, Bong developed a different philosophy. Close, fire, stay away, he said. 3 simple principles that challenged the romanticization of aerial duels. Bong didn't see aerial combat as chivalry or sport. He saw it as work, and work should be done efficiently. The Japanese Zero fighters were extraordinary machines, extremely agile. They could turn in impossible circles and climb like rockets. But they had fatal weaknesses: light armor, unprotected fuel tanks, and a fragile structure. The P-38 Lightning was the opposite: heavy, heavily armed, but less maneuverable. Bong understood that victory didn't mean outmatching the enemy's own strengths, but exploiting their weaknesses. He obsessively studied combat reports, noting Japanese pilot behavior patterns and identifying repeated mistakes. His preferred tactic became known as boom and zoom. Bong used the P-38's superior altitude and speed to dive down on the Zeros, fire at high speed, and climb back up before they could react. He never allowed himself to be drawn into circling combat where the Zero had the advantage. During missions, while other pilots scattered, chasing individual targets, Bong maintained iron discipline. He would choose a target, execute the attack, and withdraw to reassess. This methodical approach allowed him to survive while racking up victories. In March 1943, Bong achieved his fifth confirmed aerial victory, officially becoming a flying ace. But he was just warming up. In the following months, his kill count grew impressively: 7 victories in April, 10 in May, and 15 in July. What set Bong apart was his ability to learn from each combat. He kept a notebook where he recorded details of each engagement: angle of approach, firing distance, enemy reaction, mistakes made. It was a scientific approach to what many considered art or instinct. His squadron mates began to notice something peculiar. Bong rarely returned with significant damage to his aircraft. While other pilots returned riddled with bullets, Bong's P-38 remained virtually intact. It wasn't luck. It was precision in avoiding unnecessary risk. General George Kenney, commander of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific, was fascinated by the young pilot. In his memoirs, Kenney wrote, "Bong was not reckless. He was calculating. Every move had purpose. Every shot had intent. But Bong's efficiency came at an emotional cost. Unlike pilots who boasted of their victories, he rarely spoke of the men he had killed. In letters home, he mentioned only that he was doing his job. His mother sensed something between the lines, a sadness that words couldn't express." By September 1943, at age 23, Richard Bong had shot down 21 enemy planes, becoming the highest-scoring American ace of the war. And there was still a long way to go. The spring of 1943 marked the most intense period of the Bong campaign. Allied forces advanced across New Guinea, and every kilometer was fought with blood. The Japanese resisted fiercely, and air control was absolutely crucial to the success of ground operations. Bong flew almost daily, sometimes multiple missions in a single day. Bomber escort, fighter patrols, ground attacks. He never turned down a mission, even when he could legitimately rest. There was something in him that couldn't stand still while men fought. On April 12, 1943, Bong participated in one of the largest air battles of the Pacific Theater. 50 P-38 Lightnings engaged a similarly sized Japanese formation over Huon Gulf. The sky was a chaos of tracers, explosions, and burning machines falling to their deaths. Eyewitnesses reported that Bong remained calm as all hell broke loose around him. He singled out a Zero, pursuing an Allied P-38, methodically positioned himself, and fired a devastating burst. The Zero disintegrated in mid-air. Seconds later, he shot down another that was trying to escape by diving. In that battle, Bong saved the lives of at least 3 Allied pilots who were in desperate situations. He had a knack for appearing at the right time, in the right place. His colleagues began calling him Guardian Angel. But it wasn't all victory. In June 1943, Bong nearly died when his P-38 was hit by Japanese anti-aircraft fire during a low-altitude attack. The left engine was destroyed, and he had to fly more than 200 kilometers over enemy territory with only one engine working. The situation was desperate. The P-38 could barely maintain altitude, and Japanese fighters were in pursuit. Bong threw away everything he could to reduce weight: ammunition, radio equipment, even his survival kit. He flew so low over the ocean that his wing almost touched the waves. Miraculously, he reached Allied territory and landed on a makeshift runway. When he exited the aircraft, his legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. Mechanics counted more than 40 bullet and shrapnel hits in the fuselage. Any one of them could have been fatal. That experience changed something in Bong. He realized that skill and strategy didn't guarantee survival. There was always an element of luck, of randomness that no pilot could control. This awareness made him even more careful, even more disciplined. In July 1943, Bong was promoted to Major, an exceptionally rapid progression. With 24 confirmed victories, he had surpassed the record of Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, the top American ace of World War I. The American press began covering his exploits, transforming the Wisconsin farmer into a national hero. But fame didn't change Bong. He continued writing simple letters home, asking about the harvest and his younger brothers. For him, Shooting down enemy planes wasn't heroism. It was duty. True heroism, he said, lay in the infantrymen who fought in the mud and blood. October 1943 brought the most dangerous encounter of Bong's career. He faced an extraordinarily skilled Japanese pilot, possibly a veteran of the early days of the war. The duel took place over Rabaul, the most heavily defended Japanese stronghold in the South Pacific. Bong was leading a patrol of 4 P-38s when they encountered a formation of Zeros escorting bombers. The fight began with the Allied advantage, but quickly descended into chaos. One particular Zero, flown with exceptional skill, began shooting down P-38s with deadly accuracy. Bong immediately recognized he was facing someone different. The movements were calculated, the maneuvers were perfect, and the Japanese pilot clearly understood the P-38's limitations. It was like looking in a mirror, encountering an enemy who thought exactly like him. The duel lasted almost 15 minutes, an eternity in aerial combat. Both pilots tried to gain an advantage, but the other always had a response. Bong would dive, the Zero would follow. Bong would climb, the Zero would anticipate. It was three-dimensional chess played at 600 kilometers per hour. Bong's ammunition was running low. He had perhaps 20 seconds of fire remaining. He needed a perfect shot, or he would have to flee, something that hurt his professional pride. It was then that he made a bold decision that completely contradicted his tactical principles. Bong deliberately placed himself in a vulnerable position, feigning a rookie mistake. He let the P-38's nose lift too much in a turn, as if it had lost speed. The Japanese pilot took the bait and dove into attack, positioning himself exactly where Bong had predicted, in a move rehearsed 1,000 times. Bong inverted the P-38 in a physics-defying maneuver, aligning the aircraft's nose with the Zero approaching. Both fired simultaneously. For a split second, the two aircraft's traces intertwined in the air. The Zero exploded. One of its wings tore off, and the aircraft entered a death spiral. Bong briefly saw the pilot eject, the parachute opening as he fell toward the jungle. But the P-38 had also been hit. The hydraulic system was failing, and black smoke was beginning to pour from the right engine. Bong shut down the damaged engine and began the long journey back to base. Every minute felt like an hour. The smoke was growing, and he could feel the heat rising in the cabin. If the fire spread, he would have to bail out over Japanese-held territory. He managed to reach an Allied forward base, but the runway was too short for a normal approach. Bong had to make an emergency landing without hydraulic brakes, using only the engines to control speed. The aircraft came to a stop just meters from the end of the runway, so damaged it was deemed beyond repair. When mechanics inspected the P-38, they found 3 bullet impacts inches from the fuel tank. One of them had passed through the cockpit, inches from Bong's head. He had won the duel, but by an incalculable margin. That night, for the first time in months, Bong couldn't sleep. In December 1943, Richard Bong returned to the United States for a brief leave of absence. America needed heroes, and the 23-year-old pilot had become the face of the Pacific campaign. He visited aircraft factories, participated in war bond sales, and gave interviews to the press. But Bong was uncomfortable with the fame. During a press conference in Los Angeles, a reporter asked how he felt about being America's greatest flying ace. Bong replied, "I'd rather be back with my guys. They do the real work." While on leave, he met Marjorie Vattendahl, a young woman of Swedish descent who worked as a librarian in Superior, Wisconsin. It was love at first sight. Marjorie was intelligent, compassionate, and completely indifferent to Bong's fame. She loved him for the shy farmer he was deep down, not the war hero the press had created. They began exchanging letters daily. In his messages to Marjorie, Bong revealed vulnerabilities he had never shared with anyone. He spoke of the fear he felt before each mission, of the faces of the Japanese pilots who pursued their dreams, of the guilt of being alive while so many had died. In February 1944, Bong returned to the Pacific, but now with a purpose beyond the war. He wanted to survive. He wanted to return to Marjorie. This motivation, paradoxically, made him more dangerous in the air. Pilots fighting to survive are more cautious, more precise, more lethal. By April 1944, Bong had achieved 27 victories, officially surpassing Eddie Rickenbacker as the greatest American flying ace of all time. General Douglas MacArthur personally awarded Bong the Congressional Medal of Honor, America's highest military distinction. At the ceremony, MacArthur said, "Major Bong, you are a credit to your race, your family, and your country. Future generations will speak of your exploits with admiration and gratitude." Bong, characteristically uncomfortable, replied only, "Thank you, sir." But the record didn't satisfy Bong. He continued flying missions, now officially designated as a combat instructor, though in practice he remained a frontline pilot. Between May and December 1944, he added 13 more victories to his impressive tally. On December 17, 1944, during an escort mission over the Philippines, Bong shot down his 40th and last enemy aircraft. It was a Japanese Ki-43 Oscar fighter attempting to intercept B-24 bombers. Bong hit it with a 3-second burst, and the Oscar crashed in flames over the Philippine jungle. 40 confirmed victories, a record that remains unbeaten to this day, more than 80 years later. No American pilot has ever approached that number. Bong had redefined what it meant to be an ace pilot, but the price had been high. Bong weighed 15 kilograms less than when he arrived in the Pacific. His hair had begun to gray at the age of 24. Nightmares tormented him every night. He'd won 40 duels with death, but each victory had taken a piece of his soul. In January 1945, General George Kenney made a difficult decision. He ordered Richard Bong to return permanently to the United States. Officially, it was so Bong could serve as an instructor and spokesman for the Air Force. Unofficially, Kenney knew Bong's luck was running out. No one can defy death 40 times and expect the 41st to be any different, Kenney wrote in his personal diary. Bong deserves to live. He deserves to have a life after this damned war. Bong was torn. Part of him wanted to stay with his men, to keep fighting until the end of the war. But another part, the part that wrote passionate letters to Marjorie, longed to go home, to a normal life, to peace. The trip back to the United States took 3 days, with stops at several Pacific islands. At each stop, Bong was recognized and celebrated. Soldiers asked for autographs. Generals wanted to shake his hand. Reporters asked endless questions. He smiled politely, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. When he finally arrived in San Francisco in February 1945, a crowd of thousands awaited him. Bands played, confetti fell, and politicians gave grand speeches. Bong remained on the platform, uncomfortable with all the attention, thinking only of reaching Wisconsin. On February 10, 1945, Richard Bong and Marjorie Vattendahl were married in a simple ceremony in Superior, Wisconsin. It was exactly the kind of event Bong wanted. Small, intimate, with only family and close friends in attendance. No spotlights or military propaganda. In the weeks that followed, Bong tried to adapt to civilian life. He visited his family in Poplar, worked on the farm with his father, and tried to find normalcy in the routine he had left behind 4 years earlier. But something had irreversibly changed. He no longer fit into that simple world. The nightmares worsened. Marjorie would wake in the middle of the night to find her husband sitting on the porch, staring up at the starry sky, clearly somewhere else. He spoke little about what he had experienced, but the emotional scars were evident. In March 1945, the Air Force assigned Bong to a new role, test pilot. He would be responsible for evaluating new jet fighters, a revolutionary technology that promised to make propeller-driven aircraft obsolete. It was a prestigious, relatively secure position that would allow him to continue flying. Bong accepted the assignment with renewed enthusiasm. Flying was all he knew how to do. In the air, he felt complete, in control, alive. On the ground, he was just a man haunted by memories he couldn't share. The war in the Pacific was heading towards its violent end. In April, Bong learned of Franklin Roosevelt's death and felt profound sadness. In May, Germany surrendered. In August, atomic bombs devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki, finally forcing Japan's surrender. World War II was over. Richard Bong had survived. At 24, he had his whole life ahead of him. A loving wife, a promising career, the gratitude of a nation. The future seemed bright and full of possibilities, but fate, cruel and relentless, had other plans for the greatest American flying ace. In August 1945, Richard Bong was at Burbank Air Force Base in California, testing a revolutionary new jet fighter, the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star. It was the next generation of fighter aircraft, capable of speeds exceeding 900 kilometers per hour. Far beyond any propeller-driven aircraft, the P-80 was a fascinating but complex machine. Unlike the piston engines Bong knew intimately, the jet engine was a new technology, with completely different characteristics and limitations. Test pilots had to learn an entirely new way of flying. Bong had only completed 22 hours of flight time in the P-80, a time considered insufficient to fully master the aircraft. But he was Richard Bong, America's greatest ace. If anyone could quickly master a new aircraft, it was he. On the morning of August 6, 1945, the same day the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Bong prepared for a routine test flight. Marjorie was in Wisconsin visiting family. He had spoken to her on the phone the night before, making plans to meet again that weekend. At 2:30 p.m., Bong took off in P-80 aircraft number 4485048. The takeoff was normal. He climbed to approximately 400 meters and began performing basic test maneuvers. Observers on the ground reported that everything appeared routine. Then, just 5 minutes after takeoff, something went terribly wrong. The P-80's engine suddenly and catastrophically failed. Eyewitnesses saw the aircraft begin to lose altitude rapidly. Bong attempted to return to the runway, but he was too low and too slow. Following standard training, Bong attempted to eject. But the P-80's first-generation ejection system was notoriously problematic. Either it failed completely, or Bong was at insufficient altitude for the parachute to deploy properly. The P-80 crashed in an open field a few kilometers from the base. The aircraft exploded on impact, creating a fireball visible for miles. Richard Ira Bong died instantly. He was 24 years, 10 months, and 13 days old. Rescue teams arrived within minutes, but there was nothing they could do. America's greatest flying ace, the man who had survived countless dogfights against elite Japanese pilots, had died on a routine test flight over American soil. The news reached Marjorie by phone. She was helping her mother in the kitchen when the ringing sounded. When she heard the words, her knees buckled and she fell to the floor, phone still in hand. Her husband, the love of her life, had left just 6 months after their wedding. The Bong family in Poplar received the news via an official telegram. Carl Bong, Richard's father, read the words silently, then walked to the barn and cried alone. His mother, Dora, never fully recovered. She kept Richard's room exactly as he had left it, preserving every detail as a shrine. The tragedy of Bong's death was magnified by its cruel irony. He had defied death 40 times in the hostile skies of the Pacific, faced the best pilots of the Japanese Empire, survived catastrophic damage to his aircraft, and returned home a hero, only to die in a peacetime test accident. Subsequent investigation revealed that the P-80's engine had suffered a fuel pump failure, a known but not fully resolved defect. The low altitude and reduced speed during the tests did not give Bong enough time to react adequately. Some engineers suggested that Bong, accustomed to the P-38's reliable piston engines, may have underestimated the risks of the new jet engines. Others argued that the faulty ejection system was the real culprit. The truth likely lay somewhere in between. Richard Bong's funeral took place in Poplar, Wisconsin, on August 11, 1945. Thousands of people attended, including generals, politicians, and war veterans. General George Kenney delivered the eulogy, struggling to control his emotions as he spoke of the young pilot who had served under his command. Dick Bong was the embodiment of the best of American youth, Kenney said. Brave without being reckless, lethal without being cruel, famous without being arrogant. He fought not for glory, but because it was his duty. And now, when peace has finally come, we have been deprived of his presence. Marjorie Vatndal Bong never remarried. She dedicated the rest of her life to preserving her husband's memory, working with museums and historians. She died in 2003 at the age of 79 and was buried next to Richard. Richard Bong's death shocked the American nation. Newspaper headlines across the country mourned the loss of the country's greatest aviation hero. President Harry Truman issued an official statement calling Bong one of the most brilliant pilots who ever lived, and ordered flags flown at half-staff at military installations. But Bong's true legacy goes far beyond headlines and decorations. He fundamentally redefined what it meant to be a fighter pilot. His methodical, disciplined, and calculated approach influenced generations of military pilots. In the decades that followed, Bong's tactics were studied at military academies around the world. His principle of approach, shoot, and retreat became standard doctrine for aerial combat. Instructors cited his methods when teaching new pilots tactical discipline and lethal efficiency. In 1950, the United States Air Force, now an independent branch of the military, named its main base in Wisconsin Richard I. Bong Air Force Base in his honor. The base operated until 1977, training thousands of pilots who carried Bong's principles into future conflicts. Monuments have been erected in his memory. In Superior, Wisconsin, a bridge over Lake Superior was named the Richard I. Bong Memorial Bridge. In Poplar, his hometown, a museum dedicated to his life preserves his uniforms, medals, and personal letters. The P-38 Lightning that Bong flew during many of his missions has been restored and is on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. The aircraft, painted in Bong's original colors and bearing the name Marge on the nose in honor of his wife, is one of the museum's most visited attractions. Veterans who served with Bong spoke of him with reverence mixed with affection. "He never made you feel inferior," a former squadron mate recalled in 1985. "He was the best of all of us, but he never acted like it. He treated mechanics with the same respect he treated generals." The Bong family kept his memory alive through generations. His younger brothers, aged between 8 and 16 when he died, shared stories of their older brother who repaired tractors and dreamed of adventure. To them, Richard was never the legendary ace. He was just Dick, the brother who taught them to fish and defended them from bullies. Military historians debate what would have happened if Bong had survived. Some speculate that he might have become a general, shaping Air Force doctrine during the Cold War. Others suggest he would have returned to the quiet life he always wanted, perhaps as a teacher or a farmer. Marjorie Bong offered her own perspective in a 1995 interview. 50 years after her husband's death, Dick never wanted to be famous. He just wanted to do his job, come home, and live a simple life. The war made him a hero, but all he really wanted was peace. Richard Bong's record of 40 victories remains unbeaten. No American pilot has ever approached that number. And with the changing nature of modern aerial warfare, it's unlikely anyone will. When we look at the life of Richard Era Bong, it's impossible not to reflect on the extraordinary contradictions that defined his existence. He was a young farmer who became America's most lethal aerial warrior. A gentleman who killed 40 adversaries, a national hero who simply wanted to return home. What made Bong so exceptional wasn't just his skill as a pilot, though that was undoubtedly extraordinary. It was his ability to remain human in circumstances that destroy humanity. In letters preserved at the Bong Museum, we see a man constantly questioning the meaning of his actions, searching for purpose beyond the tally of victories. In a particularly revealing letter written to his father in July 1944, Bong wrote, "Father, every time I shoot down a plane, I think there is a man inside, someone with a family, with dreams, with people who love him. I do it because I have to, because it is my duty to protect our men." But I never celebrate. Every victory is also a tragedy. These words reveal the moral depth of a man who could easily have been consumed by the adrenaline and glory of combat. Bong understood that war is not a sport, that killing is not a conquest, that survival is not a triumph. It was simply the inevitable result of dire circumstances. Bong's tactical approach revolutionized aerial combat in ways that still resonate today. Before him, many pilots viewed aerial duels as extensions of medieval chivalry. There was a dangerous romanticization of the honorable dogfight, the clean duel between worthy adversaries. Bong demolished this notion. He understood that in war the goal is not to fight honorably, but to win efficiently. His philosophy of maximizing advantages and minimizing risks saved countless Allied lives. Pilots who adopted his methods had significantly higher survival rates. Their instructors in modern military academies teach the Bong principle. Use your advantages, avoid the enemies, never fight fair when you can fight smart. It's a philosophy that transcends aviation and applies to military strategy in general. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Bong's legacy is how it challenges our notions of heroism. We live in a culture that glorifies warriors, that transforms soldiers into superheroes, that romanticizes violence when perpetrated by good guys. Bong rejected all of this. He never considered himself a hero. In every interview, every public appearance, he redirected praise to others. The real heroes, he insisted, were the infantrymen in the mud, the medics saving lives under enemy fire, the engineers building bridges under bombardment. He was just a pilot doing his job. This genuine humility, combined with extraordinary competence, created a figure who transcends simplistic nationalism. Bong didn't fight out of abstract ideology or hatred of the enemy. He fought because men he knew and respected needed protection. His motivations were personal and human, not political or philosophical. Bong's untimely death adds a tragic layer to his legacy. He survived the bloodiest war in history, only to die in a preventable accident. There's something profoundly unfair about this, a cruelty of fate that feels almost Shakespearean, but perhaps there's a lesson here too. Bong dedicated himself completely to the cause of defeating fascism and protecting his comrades. He risked everything, repeatedly, for something greater than himself. And when the war ended, he continued serving, testing aircraft to make flying safer for future generations. His death was not in vain. The P-80 failure that killed him led to significant improvements in jet propulsion systems and ejection mechanisms. Future pilots lived because Richard Bong died. There's a quiet heroism in this, a sacrifice that never made headlines but saved lives. Today, more than 80 years after his death, Richard Bong remains the highest-scoring ace in American military history. His record not only survives, but will likely never be broken. The nature of aerial warfare has fundamentally changed. Modern combat is fought at long range with guided missiles, not in close-quarters duels with machine guns. But Bong's legacy transcends numbers. He represents something fundamental about the American character at its best. The ability of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when called upon. The humility to remain connected to one's roots, no matter the circumstances. The wisdom to understand that competence does not justify arrogance. World War II veterans are disappearing rapidly. Within a few years, there will be no one left alive who served with Bong, who heard his stories firsthand, who knew the man behind the legend. But his lessons remain relevant. We live in turbulent times, where heroism is often confused with bravado, where strength is mistakenly associated with aggression. Richard Bong reminds us that true strength comes from discipline, that true heroism includes humility, that true courage is often silent. He was the crazy farm boy who single-handedly destroyed 40 Japanese planes. But more importantly, he was the young man who never forgot where he came from, who treated everyone with respect, who questioned the meaning of his own actions, who loved deeply and was loved deeply, Richard Ira Bong wasn't just an exceptional pilot, he was an exceptional man who flew. And therein lies all the difference. His story isn't just about aerial victories or military records. It's about maintaining humanity when the world around us crumbles into violence. It's about doing the impossible while remaining firmly connected to what truly matters. The farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin, soared higher than anyone could have imagined. And when he fell, he left a legacy that continues to inspire generations. Not because he was invincible, but because he was human. Deeply, complicatedly, and tragically human. End.